Israeli warplanes carried out multiple overnight strikes across the Gaza Strip, targeting what the army described as Hamas positions after the death of an Israeli soldier near the border. Health officials in Gaza reported dozens of casualties, calling it the deadliest night since the US brokered truce began earlier this month. The attacks centered on the densely populated Nusayrat refugee camp, where several residential buildings were reduced to rubble. According to the Israeli military, dozens of Hamas targets were struck across the enclave following the death of an Israeli soldier near the border. The strikes targeted what Israel called militant positions and command posts in multiple areas, including the central Nusayrat refugee camp. Inside Gaza, hospitals reported scores of casualties, with emergency teams working through the night to recover bodies and survivors from beneath collapsed homes. Local authorities said entire families were trapped in the debris after a series of explosions ripped through densely populated neighborhoods. At the Nusayrat camp, residents described scenes of devastation. Despite the current truce, the occupation continues to bomb homes and innocent people in their houses, said Wael Najm, a resident of Nusayrat camp. Standing amid the ruins of his home, another resident, Munir Maimon, recounted the moment the strikes began. "We had dinner and sat down, and then it was as if Judgment Day had come. All these stones were on top of us, and we stayed for more than 2 hours while they were removing the rubble from over us," he said. "We are living in a state of ceasefire, and we were comfortable as was safe, but unfortunately there is no safety, and every day we hear about martyrs dying." The strikes came on the 19th day of the US-mediated ceasefire, which had largely held despite sporadic exchanges of fire in recent weeks. Israel's army said it acted in response to the death of a soldier during what it called a security operation near the Gaza border fence. The statement emphasized that Israel retains the right to respond to any attack, even during the truce. Hamas officials denied involvement in the soldier's death, saying its fighters had no connection to the incident. The group reaffirmed its commitment to the ongoing ceasefire, calling the latest Israeli operations a clear violation of the truce terms agreed upon earlier in the month. Palestinian health authorities said many of the victims were civilians, including women and children, and that hospitals in the central and northern Gaza Strip were overwhelmed. Power cuts and fuel shortages further complicated rescue and treatment efforts. Witnesses in Nusayrat described chaotic scenes as ambulances and volunteers rushed to dig through the rubble. Footage from the area showed shattered homes, twisted metal, and families searching for belongings among the debris. One image captured a young boy sitting silently amid the wreckage, a stark reflection of the toll on civilians. The Israeli government has not yet confirmed whether ground operations will resume. Officials in Jerusalem said the military remains in a defensive posture, but will continue to neutralize imminent threats. The renewed escalation comes as Washington and regional mediators attempt to preserve the fragile truce brokered earlier this month, which had allowed limited humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. US President Donald Trump reiterated his support for Israel's position, saying the country had the right to hit back if attacked. The latest violence follows weeks of relative calm after the ceasefire paused months of fighting. Analysts say the renewed airstrikes risk undermining ongoing diplomatic efforts led by Egypt and Qatar, aimed at extending the truce and securing further prisoner exchanges. International agencies have expressed alarm at the new escalation. Humanitarian organizations working inside Gaza warned that repeated violations of the truce threaten to reverse progress made in restoring basic services and aid delivery. The World Health Organization said hospitals are operating beyond capacity, with shortages of medical supplies and staff exhaustion after months of continuous emergencies. On the Israeli side of the border, military sirens sounded intermittently overnight, though no new rocket launches were reported from Gaza. Residents in southern Israel were advised to remain near shelters as a precaution. In Tel Aviv, Israeli security analysts told local media that the strikes were likely intended as a limited deterrent action rather than a full return to combat operations. However, they acknowledged the risk of rapid escalation if Hamas retaliates. Diplomatic contacts continued throughout the day. Egyptian and Qatari mediators reportedly urged both parties to exercise restraint and to reaffirm their commitment to the truce framework, which includes phased hostage exchanges and monitored humanitarian corridors. In Gaza City, the civil defense said recovery teams are still searching for survivors in the central region, where multiple residential structures were hit overnight. The organization described the situation as catastrophic, citing a shortage of heavy machinery and rescue equipment. As daylight broke, plumes of smoke continued to rise from bombed-out neighborhoods visible from across the border in southern Israel. Residents picked through the wreckage, salvaging what little remained. The United Nations has called for an immediate cessation of hostilities, warning that the humanitarian situation in Gaza remains dire. More than 1 million people are still displaced, and basic infrastructure, including water, sanitation and electricity, remains severely damaged. Despite calls for calm, both sides have hardened their positions. The Israeli government insists that Hamas must fully comply with truce obligations, including halting any armed activity near the border. Hamas, for its part, accuses Israel of provocations aimed at collapsing the ceasefire. In Washington, the White House said it was monitoring the situation closely. A spokesperson reaffirmed US support for Israel's security, but emphasized the importance of maintaining stability and avoiding civilian casualties. The ceasefire remains the best path to protect lives on both sides, the statement said. European Union foreign ministers echoed the appeal, urging all parties to fully implement every phase of the agreed ceasefire plan. Several European Union member states expressed concern that the renewed airstrikes could derail ongoing humanitarian operations inside Gaza. At the same time, aid convoys that had resumed crossing through the Rafah and Kerem Shalom crossings earlier this month were temporarily suspended due to security concerns. Egyptian authorities confirmed that deliveries of food, fuel and medical supplies would resume once conditions allow. By late evening, Gaza's civil defense teams continued to search the ruins in Nuseirat. Eyewitnesses said the sound of explosions had faded, replaced by the mechanical grind of bulldozers clearing debris. Families gathered outside hospitals, waiting for news of missing relatives. The toll from the night's bombardment has not been independently verified, but local officials say it represents the single deadliest wave of strikes since the truce began. As of this report, there has been no official announcement of renewed ceasefire talks. The situation along the Israel-Gaza border remains tense, with both sides trading accusations and the prospect of a return to full-scale hostilities still uncertain. The Israeli military continues to describe its actions as defensive strikes against Hamas targets, while Palestinian authorities report mounting civilian casualties. The fragile ceasefire, now in its third week, stands on the brink, with diplomatic efforts intensifying to prevent a broader collapse of the truce. Regional mediators from Egypt and Qatar are now working to re-establish communication between the two sides, urging both Israel and Hamas to adhere to the terms of the US-brokered deal. The United Nations has warned that any further escalation could derail ongoing humanitarian operations and risk a full return to hostilities. For civilians in Gaza, the ceasefire remains fragile, with every night bringing renewed fear of another round of strikes.